Do you ever wonder why some cartoons from the 1980s still echo in your mind like childhood hymns you never forgot? The kind that didn't just entertain you, they shaped how you saw the world. These weren't just shows, they were lessons disguised as laser beams, heroism wrapped in neon color palettes, and yet, most of them ended far too soon. So let's rewind the tape and revisit the ones that should have never, ever faded to black. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. You remember the ritual. The room wasn't just quiet, it was expectant. That synth fanfare hit, Prince Adam raised the sword, and you felt a current pass through your chest. "I have the power" wasn't a catchphrase, it was permission. Permission to be brave, to be better, to show up for the people who needed you. Eternia wasn't background, it was a place you could practically smell. The metal tang of Man-at-Arms' workshop, the mossy cool around Castle Grayskull's drawbridge, the powdery ozone after one of Orko's spells fizzled into sparkles. Even Skeletor's cackle lives somewhere in your bones. Ridiculous, menacing, and somehow comforting because it meant the game was afoot. The hook was simple, but it worked every time. Adam's transformation wasn't about hiding, it was about revealing. The strength was always there, just waiting for a moment of truth. That's why those end-of-episode lessons landed. They weren't tacked on scolding. They were a second transformation, the kind that turned spectacle into meaning. Be honest. Ask for help. Don't wander off alone. You didn't just watch He-Man win. You rehearsed the choices you wanted to make when it was your turn to be strong. Context mattered too. He-Man lived at the crossroads of sci-fi and sorcery, a place where laser cannons and ancient runes shook hands. It made your imagination bilingual. You learned that a world could hold contradictions and still make sense. Robots and sorceresses, battle cats and flying discs, because the values underneath were steady. Protect the vulnerable, outthink the bully, lift your friends. Compared to shows today with sleeker animation and serialized arcs, He-Man's repetition seems quaint, but the repetition was the point. It carved grooves in your memory so the lessons stuck. And sure, you could spot reused sword swings and recycled running cycles, but nothing recycled the feeling when the sky cracked open and the sword met the storm. If you look at life now, the echoes are obvious. You still carry a private version of that sword. Maybe it's showing up for a friend when you're scared. Maybe it's telling the truth when a lie would be easier. The show ended because markets shifted and trends moved on, but stories don't end when the credits roll. They end when the lesson stops being useful. Has this one stopped being useful to you? Or is there some part of your day, today, that's asking for a quiet, resolute by the power of Grayskull? And right as Eternia taught you that courage can be chosen, a convoy of Chrome taught you that courage can be engineered. Transformers. Before the picture even sharpened, you heard it, that crisp percussive rattle that sounded like gravity locking into place. It's funny how a single sound can carry a whole philosophy. Transformers told you that form can change, but purpose must be constant. Trucks, jets, boomboxes, insects. What mattered was alignment. Autobot or Decepticon wasn't just a team, it was a code. From the first frame, the show felt planetary. You weren't just in a city, you were between worlds, Earth's grid underfoot, Cybertron's neon sky in your peripheral vision. Optimus Prime's voice was the tuning fork, calm, weighted, as if every sentence had been carried across a long distance so it would arrive intact. Freedom is the right of all sentient beings didn't play like a slogan. It felt like a quietly held belief, tested 1,000 times and still chosen. Then there was Megatron, lacerating, hungry, a negative image that made Prime's steadiness glow brighter. Good and evil weren't abstractions, they were choices with consequences, played out in steel and spark. The sensory world of the show did half the storytelling. The hum of Energon, the bright sting of laser fire against a dusk sky, the hydraulic sigh when a mech took a knee. You could map a character by their sound alone. Starscream's serrated whine, Soundwave's vocoder chill, Bumblebee's spry eagerness. Even the transformation sequence told a truth. Change is loud, visible, and sometimes awkward. But when it clicks, everything fits. As a kid, you practiced that truth with your toys, learning intuitively that complexity can fold into coherence if you're patient enough to find the hinge. Context gave it teeth. This was war, but it was also family, loyalty braided through circuitry. The show introduced you to grief long before you had the vocabulary for it. When Optimus fell, it wasn't the loss of metal, it was the sudden gap where certainty used to live. You learned that leadership is not invincibility, it's service. You learned that sacrifice isn't the end of a story, but the price of its integrity. Modern shows might offer higher gloss, broader lore, tighter continuity, but few have handed kids a first encounter with mortality that respectful. Transformers did, then invited you to carry on anyway. Compared to today's narrative sprawl, those old episodes can look jagged. Animation hiccups, continuity oddities, plots that sprint when they should breathe. But even the rough edges taught something. Heroism isn't about perfect frames, it's about reliable intent. The Autobots didn't win because they were flawless. They won because they returned, again and again, to the same promise. Protect life, even when it's messy. And you absorbed that cadence. Maybe that's why, when your life reconfigures, new job, new city, new self, you listen for the click. Are the parts locking into purpose, or are you forcing a shape that doesn't belong? So when the last echo of transforming steel fades, the battlefield shifts from chrome skies to cobalt lasers and code names. The next lesson arrives not in pistons and spark, but in teamwork and tactics. Because right after the Autobots taught you purpose, a special missions force taught you how to hold the line together. G.I. Joe, a real American hero. Every kid knew that intro by heart. G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained special mission force. The music hit like an adrenaline shot, and you were locked in before the logo even appeared. For 22 minutes, you were in the cockpit, flying through clouds of neon blue laser fire. No one ever died, of course. Parachutes always opened just in time. But that didn't dull the intensity. The show was warfare sanitized for imagination, and somehow that made it even grander. What kept you watching wasn't the explosions, it was the personalities. Duke's calm authority, Scarlet's quick intelligence, Snake Eyes' silent mystique. Even Cobra's misfits had charisma. Cobra Commander was a melodramatic tyrant who couldn't win a coin toss, yet every kid imitated his hiss. The villains were dangerous but cartoonishly human, giving you a safe way to wrestle with fear and failure. Behind the spectacle, the series functioned like a moral puzzle. Every episode carried a structure you could count on: plan, conflict, teamwork, lesson. Knowing is half the battle wasn't just a sign-off. It was an education. Those post-episode PSAs, fire safety, honesty, kindness, folded the extraordinary back into the everyday. Even if you didn't realize it, the show was quietly teaching that courage off-screen mattered as much as heroism on it. Technically, the animation was sharp for its time, Toei's dynamic boards, Marvel's story sense, but the real magic was how it made order out of chaos. The lasers always missed, but the message always landed. Courage requires cooperation. Looking back, you can see the propaganda undertones, the toy commercial motives, the idealized patriotism. Yet nostalgia softens the edges, because at the core, G.I. Joe told kids that bravery was a collective act. When the theme faded from TV schedules, it didn't really vanish. It migrated into playground war games and the word teamwork scribbled on school posters. And just when the soldiers packed up their gear, another force arrived. Not human, not mechanical, but feline and fierce, ready to defend something deeper than a flag, the spirit of home itself. Thundercats. You can still hear that cry. Thunder, thunder, Thundercats, ho! And feel your pulse rise before the first frame. If G.I. Joe made you believe in discipline, Thundercats made you believe in destiny. The opening sequence was a blur of chrome and lightning, a promise that adventure wasn't limited to Earth. You were boarding a ship to Third Earth, escaping a dying planet alongside heroes with names that felt both ancient and futuristic. Lion-O, Chitara, Panthro, Tigra. Everything about the show was designed to feel mythic. The Sword of Omens gleamed with prophetic energy, the Eye of Thundera pulsing like a heartbeat inside it. Lion-O wasn't born ready, he grew into his role, aging overnight during suspended animation and spending the series learning what leadership really means. That's why the story stuck. They mirrored growing up itself, realizing power means responsibility, that wisdom has to catch up with strength. You could sense the Japanese influence in every frame. The crisp lines, the cinematic camera sweeps, the emotional pauses between strikes. The fights felt choreographed, but what mattered were the silences before them. Mum-Ra's chant echoing through a tomb, the rustle of Third Earth's alien forests, the hum of Panthro's thunder tank cutting through fog. It was sensory storytelling long before you knew the term. Like He-Man, Thundercats hid its ethics inside adventure. Each episode carried a quiet moral current: honor, loyalty, balance. Lion-O's anointment trials were practically a hero's journey syllabus. And then there was Snarf, equal parts comic relief and conscience, reminding you that caring counts even when it's annoying. Rewatching now, you can see the repetition, the stilted dialogue, the toy catalog logic, but at the time, none of that mattered. The universe felt coherent, its heroes vulnerable, but upright. When the show ended in 1989, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like someone had switched off the sun, yet its imagery never left pop culture. Decades later, you still find Thundercats Ho echoing in memes, fan art, and gym playlists. It was a call to action disguised as a catchphrase, a reminder that courage is louder when shouted together. And as the last echo of that battle cry fades, the color palette shifts from alien red skies to the cool greens of a hidden forest village, where blue-skinned optimism replaced thunderous war drums. Next came a show that traded swords for kindness, and somehow conquered the world doing it. The Smurfs. Long before cartoons tried to be edgy or cinematic, the Smurfs gave you a world that felt like peace itself. No lasers, no dark undertones, just a forest humming with flute melodies, mushroom houses, and tiny blue people who somehow made cooperation look magical. Saturday mornings hit different when you saw that soft title card fade in, and Papa Smurf's calm voice anchored everything like a bedtime story that accidentally aired too early in the day. It wasn't just cute, it was a blueprint for community. Every Smurf had a role, a personality, a flaw. Brainy thought he was right about everything. Hefty lifted anything that stood still long enough, and Clumsy tripped into trouble, but always stumbled back out with a laugh. Even Smurfette's story, created by the villain Gargamel to destroy them, then choosing kindness instead, carried more weight than most people realized. Forgiveness, transformation, belonging. It was all there, painted in bright blues and golds. You can still hear Gargamel's muttering as he plotted with Azrael, his perpetually unimpressed cat. His failures were predictable, but comforting. You knew he'd never win, and that predictability was part of the show's charm. In a world where everything else changed too fast, the Smurfs promised that good would quietly, consistently prevail, not with fists or weapons, but with teamwork and patience. The music was light, almost hypnotic, but it hit a rhythm of moral structure beneath it. Every episode reminded you that no one thrives alone. Whether they were building bridges or outsmarting a wizard, the Smurfs did it together. For a kid, it was the simplest kind of wisdom. Community works when everyone matters. By the time the show ended its run in 1989, it felt less like a cancellation and more like a curtain gently closing on a long, happy play. The Smurf village didn't burn down or vanish, it just went quiet, waiting in some timeless forest inside your memory. When people look back and call it too sweet or childish, they miss the point. The Smurfs wasn't escapism, it was aspiration. It made kindness look cool long before kindness became a trend. And when that era of harmony faded, it was replaced by adventure again, but this time with treasure maps, airplanes, and a billionaire duck who made greed look almost noble. DuckTales. There are few things more joyful than that first woo-woo bursting from your TV speakers. DuckTales didn't just have a theme song, it had an anthem. The kind of song that made you grab anything nearby, a spoon, a comb, a crayon, and pretend it was a microphone. Disney had made animated magic before, but DuckTales brought that magic home daily, turning adventure into an after-school appointment you couldn't miss. Scrooge McDuck wasn't your typical hero. He was cranky, stingy, and obsessed with gold, yet you couldn't help but root for him. There was something mesmerizing about that vault, the way he dove headfirst into coins like it was water, laughing in defiance of physics. But underneath his gruffness was heart. Scrooge taught you that wealth meant nothing without curiosity, and that adventure was the best kind of investment. Huey, Dewey, and Louie were your entry points. Troublemaking but good-hearted, reckless but loyal. Through them, the world felt bigger. Sunken ships, ancient temples, secret societies, and every kind of treasure that could possibly sparkle under the sun. Even villains like Magica de Spell or the Beagle Boys felt like recurring characters in a dream you never wanted to end. What made DuckTales timeless was its balance. It wasn't afraid of danger, but it never lost its humor. The animation had texture, the pacing had rhythm, and the lessons hid in the chaos. Greed backfires, family matters, curiosity trumps fear. Rewatch it now and you'll notice how cinematic. It was for a kids show. Camera pans, cliffhangers, exotic locations. This was Indiana Jones with feathers, and you knew it. When the original run ended in 1990, it felt like losing a favorite uncle, the adventurous one who always told stories a little too wild to be true. Sure, the reboot brought the world back in HD and sharper wit, but the 80s original still holds the crown. Because for a generation raised on it, DuckTales wasn't just a show, it was proof that optimism could be an adventure all by itself. And as the gold dust settled on Scrooge's vault and the echoes of that final woo-woo faded away, something darker and stranger stirred beneath the city sewers, where 4 turtles, a rat sensei, and a slice of pizza would redefine what it meant to be a hero in the late 80s. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Before the internet, before touchscreen everything, there was a time when the coolest sentence you could possibly say started with 4 words: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Even the name felt rebellious. Too long, too weird, too perfect. It rolled off your tongue like a secret code you weren't supposed to know, and yet everyone in the schoolyard knew it. You could hear it from blocks away. The radical theme song blasting through old TV speakers, followed by a chant that made you want to dropkick the air. Turtle power. The first time you saw them sliding through the sewers, you didn't care that it was technically disgusting. It felt like freedom. Leonardo with his dual katanas, Raphael with his bad temper and says, Donatello tinkering with gadgets, Michelangelo spinning nunchucks and slang like cowabunga. Each one was a different kind of cool. Together they were chaos perfected. The lair was dark, damp, glowing with fluorescent graffiti and pizza boxes piled like trophies. You could almost smell the pepperoni through the screen. The turtles were more than heroes. They were a metaphor for growing up, mutants trying to fit into a world that didn't quite understand them, outcasts who chose laughter over bitterness. Their master Splinter was both father and philosopher, teaching them to fight with purpose, not anger. And then there was April O'Neil, the human link, bright yellow jumpsuit and microphone in hand, grounding their madness in the everyday world above. The moment her news van pulled up, you knew something big was about to happen. Every episode had the same ingredients: a scheme from Shredder or Krang, a lesson in teamwork, and at least one pizza joke, but it never got old. The action was wild, the comedy infectious, and the energy unmatched. You could tell the writers were having fun, even when the animation slipped or the logic didn't add up. Seriously, how did they afford all that tech living rent-free in a sewer? You didn't care. The turtles felt like friends who'd swing by your living room after school just to hang out and fight evil. And yet, buried under all the jokes was something real. The show taught that family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty. It showed that laughter could live alongside danger. When Raphael clashed with Leonardo, or when Donnie's inventions backfired, you saw your own messy family dynamics reflected back at you. They bickered, they blundered, but they always came through for one another. That, in its own goofy way, was powerful. The series ran for nearly a decade, and by the time the final episodes aired in 1996, the world had changed. The art style darkened, the tone grew grittier, and the innocence of those early days started to fade. But for anyone who grew up shouting "Booyakasha" before it was even trendy, the Turtles stayed eternal. They lived in the rhythm of every joke you cracked with your friends, every pizza night that got a little too competitive, every reminder that weirdness could be strength. When the screen finally dimmed on that sewer lair, you didn't mourn it, you smiled, because deep down, you knew they'd never really left. The Ninja Turtles were never just cartoons, they were proof that being different wasn't a curse, it was your superpower. And just when you thought Saturday mornings couldn't get any weirder, a giant robot roared to life in the sky, formed from 5 lions, and gave every kid on Earth a reason to believe in teamwork all over again. Voltron, defender of the universe. You could always tell when Voltron was about to start. The TV crackled with that cosmic hum, the narrator's voice rolling in like thunder. From days of long ago, from uncharted regions of the universe, it wasn't just an opening, it was an invocation. You didn't feel like a viewer, you felt like a recruit. Within seconds, 5 robotic lions streaked across the stars, converging into a single colossal form, and suddenly you believed, utterly, that unity could save the world. Voltron was a visual symphony of courage and coordination. 5 pilots, 5 machines, 1 impossible mission: defend the universe from evil forces. Keith, Lance, Hunk, Pidge, and Princess Allura weren't just characters. They were a team built on rhythm and trust. When they finally linked up to form Voltron, it was more than spectacle. It was metaphor. Each lion represented a part of something bigger: courage, intellect, heart, strength, and spirit. And when they moved in sync, they became invincible. The sound design etched itself into your subconscious. The metallic lock clicks of the transformation sequence, the hum of energy blades, the triumphant swell when Voltron's sword ignited against the void. Those seconds of animation, repeated almost every episode, never lost their magic. They were ritual. You didn't watch them, you participated in them. It was teamwork distilled into light and motion. For all its space battles and laser storms, Voltron wasn't about war, it was about harmony. The pilots didn't fight because they craved glory, they fought because they couldn't stand to see others fall. Every time they merged to form the blazing sword, it reminded you that strength wasn't just power, it was cooperation sharpened to perfection. Sure, the dialogue was clunky, the villains cartoonish, and the editing occasionally awkward from its Japanese origins, but none of that mattered. What stayed with you wasn't the accuracy, it was the feeling of alignment, of connection. You learned that no one wins alone, and when the credits rolled and that iconic theme faded into static, you didn't just want to be Voltron, you wanted to belong to something that made everyone stronger. But where Voltron soared through the stars, the next show brought all that heroism crashing right back down to Earth, specifically the haunted, chaotic streets of New York City. The real Ghostbusters. You remember how it started, the eerie synth line, the echo of a laugh, and that one word that always got you grinning: Ghostbusters. This wasn't the movie anymore. This was the Saturday morning continuation that turned supernatural comedy into an institution. The real Ghostbusters was wild, witty, and way smarter than it needed to be. It took what you loved from the 1984 film, the ghosts, the gadgets, the one-liners, and stretched it into a universe where the paranormal was just another part of the work week. Peter, Egon, Ray, Winston, and Janine weren't glamorous heroes. They were exhausted New Yorkers in jumpsuits, fighting ectoplasmic chaos with wit and caffeine. The cartoon leaned into that exhaustion. Busted equipment, broken, proton packs, half-eaten pizza boxes, but somehow it made heroism look like a blue-collar job. You could practically feel the hum of the proton beams and smell the burnt ozone as they wrangled ghosts in alleys and libraries. What made it click wasn't just the monsters, it was the personalities. Egon's stoic intellect balanced Peter's sarcasm, while Ray's optimism kept the team's weird family dynamic alive. Winston grounded them all, the human heartbeat in a room full of geniuses. And then there was Slimer, their pet ghost, bumbling through walls and food trays with unearned confidence. Every kid wanted a Slimer plush, even if they'd never admit it. The writing was sharper than most adults realized. Under the comedy, it explored fear, science, and responsibility. Some episodes even leaned existential, hauntings born from loneliness, guilt, or grief. Egon could drop a line about interdimensional physics that flew over your head, but you still got it emotionally. Curiosity conquers fear. The animation, done by Japan's DIC Entertainment, was vivid and strange, blending bright neon with shadowy menace. It was one of the first cartoons that made ghosts feel beautifully terrifying. The toys, lunchboxes, and serial tie-ins followed fast. But unlike most toy-driven shows, Ghostbusters earned its legacy through craft. When the show ended in the early 90s, it left behind a universe full of open doors, haunted ones. For fans, it wasn't an ending, it was just another call that hadn't been answered yet. Because once you've spent childhood believing ghosts are real, the world never looks quite as empty again. And as the last proton pack powered down and the city skyline faded into mist, Saturday morning still had one final encore left, a neon dream of holograms, music, and girl power that showed kids a new kind of heroism, glamour with grit. Jem and the Holograms. Long before pop stars were filtered through algorithms and social media, Jem and the Holograms gave you the blueprint for what it meant to live loud, lead fearlessly, and still stay kind. The moment that opening riff hit, Jem is truly outrageous. You didn't just hear a theme song, you heard a manifesto. Neon lights, shimmering holograms, pink hair, and pure attitude. It was everything the 80s wanted to be rolled into one glitter-coated revolution. Jem wasn't born from magic. She was made from courage and technology. Jerrica Benton, the orphaned CEO of Starlight Music, discovered her father's secret supercomputer, Synergy, a glowing pink AI that could project holograms indistinguishable from reality. With Synergy's help, Jerrica transformed into her alter ego, Jem, the dazzling frontwoman of the holograms. And just like that, Saturday mornings got their first real taste of a double life built on creativity, compassion, and chaos. Every episode was part concert, part soap opera, part moral play. It wasn't afraid to tackle heavy themes, identity, grief, jealousy, greed, even the pressures of fame. Beneath the sequins and synthpop were stories about loyalty and self-worth. You could see the tension in Jerrica's double life, running a business, raising foster girls, and fighting the misfits, a rival band whose attitude was as loud as their guitars. Pizzazz, Roxy, and Stormer weren't just villains, they were reflections of ego and insecurity, showing kids that even the loudest people might just want to be seen. The colors were electric, every frame looked like a music video frozen in time. The hair was big, the makeup was bigger, and the moral compass was solid. Each episode featured original songs, performed as mini music videos that often said more about the characters than the dialogue did. And when Jem sang, "It's showtime, Synergy," the air shimmered with possibility. You didn't just want to watch her, you wanted to be her, even if you didn't know why yet. What set Jem and the Holograms apart was its understanding that glamour didn't mean shallowness. It said you could be stylish and selfless, ambitious and generous. It taught a generation of kids, especially girls, that leadership could sparkle, that strength could wear heels, that kindness wasn't weakness. In a landscape dominated by male heroes and muscle-bound warriors, Jem carved out a different kind of power, one that sang instead of shouted. When the show ended in 1988, it wasn't because people stopped caring, it was because networks didn't yet know how to handle a story about women leading with empathy instead of violence. But Jem didn't fade, she glittered underground. Decades later, fans still belt those songs, draw that pink star on their cheekbones, and remember a time when being outrageous wasn't rebellion, it was survival. And as the final note faded, as Synergy's holograms dissolved into light, the message stayed behind, glowing softly like the last neon sign in a sleeping city. You can lead with love and still steal the spotlight.